Welcome, everybody. I go by the name of Alan Cohen, and today I'm connecting with a beautiful spirit that goes by the name of David Hoffmeister. It is my custom to start interviews and programs with a short prayer. So, David, would it be okay if we pray in for a moment?
Beautiful, thank you.
So, let's just take a moment to recognize that we've all been guided here for a reason, that Spirit is in charge. There are gifts for everyone here. And so we open now to the guidance of the Holy Spirit. We see both David and myself sharing what is most helpful to everyone listening, watching live, or to the archive. And we ask that only healing and well-being come from our gathering by the grace of God. And so it is.
Beautiful. Amen. It's lovely.
So, David, you have a wonderful new book out, This Moment Is Your Miracle. And I'm imagining that it's representing the cutting edge of your growth and your path on the course. So let's hear a little bit about what's in this book that's new and exciting for you and the readers, and what gifts you'd like to share through this book.
Well, when I think about this book, I think about wanting it to be really concise and profound and practical all in one, so that someone can really pick it up and use it in a very practical way. So it's meant to be inspirational, but also to draw people into the practice of practicing the presence and really being in the moment and living in the moment. Because I'm a big fan of practical application. I always say it's 1% principle and 99% practice. And so not to discount the principle, because that's very important too, to be very clear of the non-dual and the oneness, but also to really put that into practice in everyday life. And so that was my desire behind extending this book right now during these times. And I love the title, Maintaining a Spiritual Awareness, even during times when world events are cuckoo.
Let's talk a little about it, because we live in pretty crazy times. I mean, even as we're recording this, we're in the midst of the longest government shutdown in the country's history. And there's terrorism and nationalism and prejudice and just crazy, crazy stuff. So what would you say to somebody who says, it's a really nuts world. How can I survive here? And how can I live a conscious life when most of the people around me are going crazy in one form or another?
Yeah, I think we have to reframe it, and we have to put it in some kind of context, because without a context, it seems like madness, absolutely madness. Every day you wake up and it's like, what now? What can possibly be going on next? But once we bring it back to this thing that really all we're doing is allowing the unconscious, the darkness, to arise in awareness, then that's really the context we want to have and keep it in, because it's like when we're watching our own emotions and we're watching our own reactions, then it's comforting to know that those reactions are always coming from interpretations, and that we do have that power of interpretation, and no one can take that away from us. We can interpret as we choose, and ultimately I think that's very empowering. That's why we need this context, because without this context it can seem like a very depressing, disempowering experience on planet Earth at this time.
So would you say that the politicians who seem pretty nuts are actually drawing forth stuff from our collective subconscious so we can shine the light on it and heal it? Is that one of the purposes of an apparently crazy administration? Would you say something like that?
Yeah, I would say that there's underlying everything, there's an agreement in the sense that it's like a prearranged plan, a prearranged script, that things are brought up at certain times, and it's really not at random. The depressing thought would be to think, oh my gosh, that we've gone off the track somewhere, and or to try to take it in a personal way of saying, what is this politician reflecting in my mind, and can I possibly be that messed up? That's what people say to me sometimes.
So you're talking about healing the inner Trump now? Is that the idea?
That's it. I mean, that seems to be one of the key things that's up in awareness now, really for everybody on the planet. And because I travel a lot, so I'm pretty much aware of that. But it's not like when a couple years ago, when I was down going around through Mexico, they were voicing their questions. They were just upset with politics in general. They were quite upset with their own president and with the president of the United States. So it was more of a frustration around political ineffectiveness, and I do feel like that's a big theme, and I do feel it has a blessing where we start to realize the power of our thoughts, and that in A Course in Miracles we're told it is with your thoughts that we must work. So I think it starts to put the focus more on what is the content of my thinking, instead of looking outside and being tempted and lured into the blaming and the complaining, and which really is disempowering.
So it would seem as if the game is to change the external political environment and rearrange chess pieces and get your party in, when meanwhile it's an inner process where you're working with internal politics more than external ones. Yeah,
that's exactly it. I think it's when that's the focus, we are told in A Course in Miracles, what you do comes from what you think. And so again, if we start to think of behaviors as more as just byproducts or results or effects of thinking, then that's a big step, because then we can really start to zero in on the thinking. What is the content of my thoughts? And I think all sages throughout history have really tried to do that. They've just tried to say, the truth is within you. Pay attention to how you're feeling. Don't disregard your feelings. Don't repress them and try to just gloss over them, but use them as barometers, as touchstones for what's going on in your consciousness. And so in that sense, we are really kind of having to get more focused in that way to what all the sages and the saints have been saying for many centuries.
Yeah. Well, which brings me to a really interesting question I'm often asked, and it's very fascinating me to find an answer. People say, well, is the world really evolving spiritually, or is it getting worse? And I used to give them an answer about what I saw was going on in the outer world, but lately I've been saying, the world is what it is, and if there's anything evolving, it's our own particular consciousness. So do you ever see the world evolving to a place where it's going to be, quote, heaven on earth, or basically is the world just what it is, and we get to deal with it and join it or go to Holy Spirit's world? What would you say about that?
Well, I see the world as symbols, so I've been curious, like you have, about many of the different world religions and spiritualities, and I can remember quite a few years ago, actually decades ago, when I picked up this big, thick book that was thicker than the Course. It was called the Urantia book. And I was kind of fascinated because it really presented more of a evolutionary cosmology on a much broader scale. Urantia being Earth, and then the tiny little crude planet that's not very far developed, kind of like Neil Donald Walsh when he asked God in his conversations if this was a football field and we were talking about Earth and evolution, what yard line would we be on? How far do we have to go for a touchdown? I like these kind of questions. And God said, well, you're on the 5-yard line. You're on your own 5. You got 95 yards to march. And then when you think of the Urantia book, Earth was pretty much described as a very crude, backward planet. I think Ramtha through J.Z. Knight said a similar thing on What the Bleep, that is pretty primitive in terms of evolutionary development. So I think that if you take it from that concept of looking at it in terms of symbols, it is possible that there will be symbols that will get brighter and brighter and brighter and seem more evolved, although we also have to keep in the back of our mind that there's no order of difficulty in miracles and that there's really no hierarchy in illusions. That's what the blessing of the Course is. It really just hammers that home, no hierarchy of illusions. And so I think the people have to relate to it. So I do feel when people say, I want to see more of a heaven on earth, I would rather see things really evolving, and I do feel like that's a question of desire. If you really want that, and your mind is so powerful, then you will see symbols lighting up all over. And you've been writing these amazing books, which I find just delightful and fascinating, and I find on my travels for the last 30-some years that I do see lots of symbols. There's lots of laughter, there's lots of hugs, and it's at the level that I'm sharing and extending, I'm getting kind of flooded with miracles. Like they talk about Amma hugging people. I've been hugged by many people for decades now, and so that maybe is why I have such a smile on my face. I'm actually experiencing the effects of my giving and extending.
So this kind of comes to the happy dream, doesn't it? So, is it possible to live in a happy dream where as individuals or collectively a subset of society that we're living heaven on earth even while other people are living in hell on earth? Or do we have to wait till everybody gets out of hell in order for us to live in heaven? It's a big metaphysical question, but let's hear it.
Well, I feel that the teachings of quantum physics, the teachings of the saints and mystics are all teaching us that there is no world apart from our consciousness, that we're literally experiencing a motion picture of our consciousness. And so I've gone into that, and it just feels more and more, it just feels like, wow, this is really true. This is no just kind of a kind thing to say. This is an actual experience. So I would say that when we talk about the collective or we talk about individual enlightenment, I actually feel it's only at the level of the mind, and purified consciousness shows us the results of that. And so to me it's very practical. I'm always going around talking with people and listening and saying how practical this is, and it's not like burying your head in the sand like an ostrich and pretending there's no external world. It's actually diving in and saying, show me, Spirit, you have to convince me that there's no external world and that this is my own hallucination, and this will be my happy dream of non-judgment. When I'm not judging anyone or anything anymore, then I'll feel the happiness.
Yeah, and one of the things that so impresses me about you, David, is you are indeed practical. And, of the many Course teachers out there, I really look to you as somebody who truly models bringing the Course to earth and living it. Lots of people kind of go off on intellectual, metaphysical tangents, but you bring it down to earth. You can do a workshop next to a slaughterhouse. I remember that story. And that was a hard one for me because I would have been disturbed by that, I think. But you actually tell that story, would you? Because I think it's a very inspiring story. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I was in Aarhus, Denmark, and I always leave it up to the organizers as far as choosing the venues and everything. So when I was first going there, I was like, well, this is like the factory district or whatever. This isn't your typical, like on Maui where you've got the beautiful setting. This was far from it when I went in there. And then as I would go for a lunch break or take a walk, it did dawn on me when I looked across. I thought, there's a slaughterhouse right across the street from where I'm doing the gathering. And yet I have such joy and compassion where I really take it to heart when I'm told from Spirit, join with whatever, join with all your perceptions, join with the sky, join with the animals, join with everyone around you, have that sense of joining and connecting with everything. And so when I was walking along back from lunch, I believe, I just decided to go right over there to the edge of the slaughterhouse and look right into the rows where the animals were going through to be slaughtered, and really just do eye gazing. I mean, I took it as an opportunity. I mean, we do this in some of our retreats, but I said, no, this is my opportunity to gaze into their eyes, because I felt like there was a communication going on there, where they were expressing through their eyes mainly a fear. Like, what is happening? There was disorientation, there was fear, and I see that as really a call for love. So I actually took the time to be very, very present and to look right into their eyes and assure them everything's going to be okay. The same thing a child wants from a parent. Just that loving gaze of looking into your eyes and with the feeling, the full feeling, everything's going to be okay. It's all going to work out. You'll see it, is what I was telepathically extending. So, that was important, because once we got back into the workshop, people were having reactions to the location, to the venue, and there was a lot of emotions coming up, and we really had to use that fully for clearing in there.
Yeah, that's quite a teaching. It's like looking head on at death and denying it as an illusion, which is probably the biggest challenge that most people have, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's so much of an identification with the body, with matter, with appearances as being reality. And I remember in the Course, Jesus even says, what you believe, you make true for you. Meaning, subjectively, what you give over your mind to with the sense of belief, you make up a world in which it will seem to have reality for you until you withdraw your mind from that belief. And so it's quite an optical delusion of consciousness, I think is what Einstein called it. And he was quite a deep, profound thinker as well, and he came to the same awareness.
Yeah. Speaking of animals, lots of spiritual teachers say that animals don't have the same fear of death as people, because in general they're living closer to spirit. So is that your experience, or do you believe that?
Yeah, I do think they oftentimes reflect that. I know, like with pets, sometimes they'll even do things that more are a reflection of, almost like they want to show compassion for their owners, and they're kind of tuned in to their owners' emotions. And I feel there's a great wisdom in that. So I feel like they reflect a presence there that's very strong and very, very loving and compassionate.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from my dogs. They're my teachers of God in many ways. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your own path, David. So I'd be interested in hearing, what is the cutting or leading edge of your own consciousness, your own study of the Course? What is passion, exciting, and titillating? Maybe that's the best word. What's invigorating to you in terms of your study of the Course lately, or your spiritual practice?
Yeah, I feel like I go through phases kind of where there's like a bit of a stepping back and quiet phases. I've had phases over the years where I've kind of gone off to hermitages, and it's been very inward, almost more of traditional mysticism than being out. And I enjoy that aspect, and I really enjoy what seems to be the public phase. Like Jesus was kind of a public mystic, teaching out in the square and from the boat and everything like that. So for me, I think it is kind of, I feel like I'm coming more inward to one of those inward phases where I don't speak as much. I haven't been doing as many public gatherings and travels. I was talking to Miranda McPherson recently, and she was saying, yeah, she started to do more digital things, and just feel the blessing like we're doing right now. It's just this beautiful radiant transmission, and it's so easy. Whereas I contrast that with my many years of going all over the place, even India, China, Japan, some really crowded places where, you're almost like navigating the body through seas of people. And I loved all that. I absolutely adored it, but it does feel more of a phase of using the digital transmissions and also going into more of a quiet inward phase.
So, the Dalai Lama said that, you may not believe this, but he said it, that he wishes he could quit being the Dalai Lama and just go home and do a spiritual practice. So I'm sure I'm misquoting somehow, but that was the gist of it.
Yeah, I know. Recently, I met with Muji over in Portugal at his place, Sahaja, and his body was like 64, and mine was about 60. It's like he was also just what the Dalai Lama was saying. He was like looking ready to put a backpack on and just go disappear with all the people pressing on him. And so we both just kind of smiled and looked in each other's eyes like, yeah, brother, I totally feel right where you're at, because it was real similar for both of us.
Well, you and I are both movie buffs. I'm sure you're a big fan of The Life of Brian. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, yes, very well.
Where, they're trying to make Brian into the great Messiah, and he's just a bozo, and they're all following. Get out of here, leave me alone. They say, well, Master, how shall we leave you alone? There was no escape from people wanting to pull on him and tell him how to live. So, I can appreciate that as well.
Yeah, we like the humor. What would we do without the humor of those scenes? It just makes it all the easier for us to continue on when we can laugh like that.
Well, what does the Course say? That the separation occurred when the Son of God forgot to laugh? Yes, something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
So, we have people who are listening to us are new to the Course and people who've been with it for a while. Everybody who does the Course experiences some resistance to it. So what do you say to people who've been into it a little while and say, I don't know, I got to lesson 50 and I got bummed out and I quit. So, what advice would you give to people who value the value of the Course but kind of get pulled to the side, as we all do one way or the other? How do you encourage them to continue?
Well, I think to me the context is so important, because most of us get into the spiritual journey in a way where we're hoping that our meditation practice or our spiritual practices will improve our life experiences as a human being. And I think a lot of people have that experience, that they tell me, my life was not too bad. And then I got in the Course and it just got so much worse. The intensity, the floods of those extreme emotions started to come in, almost like they consciously were taking the lid off of various defense mechanisms or protections that they weren't even aware of it. And I think one of the biggest reasons for the resistance and the struggles with the Course is there's this underlying assumption that somehow I need to bring love and light and God into my personal relationships and my personal perspective of who I am, when in fact it's kind of a washing away and a rinsing of the entire persona. It's almost going like pulling into a power wash and having the hoses turned on, and it's very disillusioning to the ego, because the ego is like, oh, come on, you got to be kidding. Like, you cannot be serious. So what I tell people is if we can just take like one statement from the Course as being very valid, that the world is backwards and upside down, then we're going to have an experience, for most of us, it's kind of like Alice in Wonderland, through the looking glass, like tumbling down the rabbit hole. So instead of the Course being like a Band-Aid to help patch your personal life together, like the Scarecrow on The Wizard of Oz, it's more like all the straw is meant to come out. It's meant to get thrown all over the road. And then there's something deeper still that I know you refer to in your books, and just your more recent book about the Tao, the Made Easy. There's that deep, deep bedrock of spirit and truth that's there when things start to really dismantle and fall apart. And so that's what I would tell people is there is a disillusionment that goes on with the dismantling, and don't be too frightened or shocked by that, but actually be open to when that's occurring. You're actually progressing, you're actually advancing, and you're clearing the mind and clearing the consciousness, and don't throw the towel in, or don't be too quick to conclude, oh my God, I'm really messed up, and other people are sane and I'm insane, because that's not really the truth of it.
Yeah. One of my favorite lines from the Course is, you cannot be your own guide to miracles because it was you who's made them necessary.
Yeah.
So if your life was working, you wouldn't need a miracle.
Yeah.
So then when I was in college, I was assigned to read a book by a Polish psychologist named, I think, Dombrowski, and it was called Positive Disintegration. And he was a psychiatrist in a mental institution, and he found that some people's lives became so dysfunctional that they actually had to fall apart before they could rebuild them. So it sounds to me like you're alluding to the same kind of falling apart that's actually a prerequisite to reconstruction.
Yeah. Yeah, I really believe that. I mean, I see that in my own path, and then also when I travel around the world and I meet people who, let's say, have gone through the 12-step program, and they will describe this dark period, this dark night of the soul, this disillusionment that's really been a big part of them turning things around. You know, like even opening to a higher power, they say they had to almost like hit bottom or hit a rock bottom. And I hear it so much, and I went through it myself, so I think that's important for us to talk about that and openly be transparent about that, because that's a part of the healing that goes on in 12-step groups. There's so much witnessing, there's so much transparency. Everyone who gives their lead really says, here's how it was, here's what I did, and here's how it is now. You know, and that's important.
I think one of the steps is our lives became unmanageable.
Yes.
And I think we have to admit, maybe not our whole life, but aspects of our life that are unmanageable, they're the ones that are calling for healing. That's what the call for love is.
Yes, it's true. It really is true.
Was there a time, David, when your life or part of it was unmanageable and the Course rescued you? Or what was your evolution in terms of the aha that the Course was really one of your best friends in this journey?
Well, I think, you know, what I found really to be helpful is in relationships, because there's a lot of spiritualities that don't really incorporate relationships into the equation of healing. They're very fine pathways to God, they're very devotional, but I found for myself those chapters between 15 and 24 about special hate relationships and then special love relationship, that was like a saving grace for me, because I think I loved reading that passage where Jesus was saying, you've almost made it back to heaven, you just have one block remaining, and it's the special relationship. Because I think, you know, there could be a disillusionment and a dismantling around sickness and health issues, around financial issues, around concerns around politics and everything, but the ones that kind of really seem to rip our heart open are the relationships. Like that scene in Braveheart, you know, Mel Gibson, where the seeming betrayal scene, just the look on his face of absolute unbelievability, like he cannot believe that his buddy would turn on him. And to me, I think that's some of the most extreme pain that we face. So I think the Course, if I had to pick one thing, I would say that was the saving grace of lift me up into serve a purpose for the whole, instead of trying to focus in on one person or looking for salvation somehow in a person.
Yeah. Well, I've been there too. I think we shared that same path. I was a little longer than 15 to 24. It's more like 15 to 50, but it's kind of, it's still somewhat, yeah, you get it when you get it. But let's talk about special relationships, because it is, it is a big hot issue for lots of folks. So let's see if we can dissect it according to the Course. Why do people focus in on one person and say, you are the one, and you are the soulmate, and you are my twin flame? And usually, in my experience, and probably yours as well, that leads to disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk. Can you talk a bit about the dynamic of zeroing on somebody as your savior? It could be a guru as well as a romantic relationship. And then, what you set yourself up for when you do that. I'd like to hear from you, please.
Yeah. Well, one of the lines that always helped me was from the Beyond All Idols section of the Course, where Jesus says, when you decide upon the form of what you want, you lose the understanding of its purpose. So when I first read that, I said, wow, that's almost like an eclipse. Like when I decide upon the form of what I want, my focus goes on the form, and then the purpose for the relationship is eclipsed by the form. He says your will is universal and cannot be content with any form of any kind. So he's saying we are entitled to vastness. We will only know happiness in vastness. We can't shrink down our vastness. God's will can't be shrunk down into an idol. And so that gave me a broader appreciation of idols, because he starts off in there in that section, what is an idol? Do you think you know? When Jesus puts do you think you know in there after his statement, it's almost like he's saying, do you really think you know? Are you following me? So I have really gone into that, and I've started to realize that if forgiveness is just seeing the false as false, forgiveness is not buying the trick of form, thinking that God's will can be shrunk down to a specific form, then it makes perfect sense that when I am riveted on an outcome, on a particular person, place, thing, whenever I try to make anything sacred, even in this world, sacred, the holy water or the holy vortex or the holy ashram or whatever, it's always a version of me saying no to forgiveness. Let me just have my special little thing here, my little amulet or whatever it is, my little altar, and give it to me. Can you just let me have a little happiness with this little thing? And the Spirit's like, you'll never be happy with that little thing. You'll only be happy with vastness. And I think all of us know somewhere inside that that's true, that we will only be content with vastness.
I studied with a mystic teacher named Hilda Charlton in New York, and she was in India for many years. She told the story that once she climbed to the top of the Himalayas to this very remote ashram, and as she was nearing the ashram, she heard a voice say, "That's my pillow." Another voice said, "No, it's my pillow. No, it's my pillow." And these two yogis were arguing over whose meditation pillow it was. And here they had renounced the entire world at the top of the Himalayas, and they were fighting over this little pillow. You basically, you take your neurosis with you wherever you go. You can't escape it by going to a mountaintop.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story.
Let's get back to people in special relationships. So let's say somebody finds himself in a special relationship with a person, a romantic, sexual, or a marriage, or whatever, and they feel stuck. There's enmity, there's judgment. What can somebody do to turn a special relationship that is steeped in fear, or guilt, or enmity to a holy relationship? What is the shifting point in that situation?
Well, to me, I think the shift would is focus on what are the gifts. Like, all of us have so many gifts to give. We have so many gifts to extend to everyone, to the whole universe, to the whole sonship. And if we can start to focus on the gifts, how can I nurture that? How can I extend that? How can I clear my mind of expectations so that I may truly appreciate the one who I am and the one who's right in front of me, then that will radiate a blessing to the whole universe. So it's so different than this getting mechanism. I think that's really the problem in interpersonal relationships, is still valuing this idea, meet my needs, get the things that I want. I was just reading right before I came over here for this interview, this tennis player, Rafael Nadal, just after he lost in the Australian Open, he just got engaged to his girlfriend of 14 years. And they were asking him, is she here? And yeah, she's here. She came over as a wild card, but basically he was saying, you know, she just comes to be with me if she really wants to. And if she doesn't want to come, she doesn't come. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to go into an engagement, is having that allowance, like really be intuitive and just offer what you want to offer, but there's not this expectation that I'm playing in a tennis tournament and you better be there, or you better meet my needs because I'm concentrating on my opponent or whatever. You know, there's so much meeting needs in relationships that it's really based on this sense of lack and getting. So that's what we're trying to purify from. We want to celebrate relationships, but I don't think we can fully celebrate as long as we're trying to get something from somebody else. And that's what the healing is, letting that go.
It's all about bringing out the best in each other instead of keeping each other in the box.
Yeah.
May I ask you, David, about your evolution in relationships? I know you've come a long way since age 24. And, you know, how do you view romantic or partnerships these days? Is it something that's in your radar or in your community? Is that a big issue? What is the cutting edge of your understanding of partnership and those around you?
Yeah, I feel like the Spirit uses everything, and so I think that can be very supportive. I think more from my perspective right now is that I see the witnesses all around me as the reflections of purpose. So my focus is really on the purpose, on the shared purpose, lighting up with that, being excited by that, being exhilarated, feeling the joy and the passion of that shared purpose. So I think probably I would say, like, for myself and for the community, there's a focus on shared purpose, and there's lots of collaborations that involve numbers of people, little configurations of teams and projects that can extend in a broader way to the whole world. And there's a synergy, a very strong synergy that comes from that really lights us up. There is an exhilaration with that synergy. So I would say we don't like go to either end of the scale. We don't have like vows like the Franciscans, you know, poverty, chastity, obedience, and you know, traditional convents and monasteries. And neither do we put something like romance together as an ideal for everyone in the community, because in our community there's maybe like 45 people. Some are paired up in given ways that feel very natural and helpful and nurturing. And then there are those that are really just into God and more internal and not really interested in interpersonal relationships in the same way that they were at an earlier time in their life. So it's kind of just a sense of acceptance and trust of let the Spirit use everything for the highest good.
Do you think there's purpose and future in the nuclear family, or do you think that model is changing?
Well, I always see the value in that, so I'm always happy to see when that's a nurturing thing. But for many people, I think a lot of young people today, they feel very alienated. Like the millennial generation, they almost feel like, how did I even get born into this culture and this family? Like they feel completely disconnected. And so I actually feel very much like Yogananda used to talk about how groups come together vibrationally drawn together by the Spirit to nurture and support sometimes course groups, or I know there's a lot of Ananda communities around the world. I do feel there's a nurturing happening when people have a very strong shared purpose, spiritual purpose, and then they give themselves over to that, and then the configuration is designed to help elevate the awareness, not so much to perpetuate a bloodline or pass on the family business or maintain a culture that's been around for decades or generations. You know, it's more of a vibrational sense of us coming together in that way.
Because there's a lot of historical reasons for marriage, you know, like you said, political, social, cultural, religious. And a lot of those, I think we've outgrown. I mean, people do not marry, well, let's put it this way. Ideally, people do not marry for political purposes. There's another reason to get together besides you're going to, you know, keep up with the Joneses. Dee and I saw a very interesting movie a couple months ago. It was called One Husband, Three Wives. And it was a documentary about a Mormon polygamous community. And we watched it because we thought it'd be funny and interesting. But actually, these people really had a lot of love and a lot of support for each other, and expanded my mind to see that where there's love, anything can work. Whether you're a monk or a nuclear family of two people or an extended nuclear family. So I was impressed by the fact that their principles on which their lives were based were bigger than the form that their family configuration was taking.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I remember in my own journey, way back before I even found the Course, I read this book by Thea Alexander called 2150 AD. And I remember opening it and going, oh, this is mind expanding. You know, I was fascinated by it. But I think it was good for me because it allowed me to travel around, live in some spiritual communities, meet lots of people, be exposed to lots of ideas, and start to stretch out of the boxes that I had, Protestant, you know, more traditional boxes. And then I enjoyed that. And then I also have this sense of integrity, like I feel like all of us, if we're going to be guided by the Spirit to use certain symbols, we can't just dismiss the symbols that we're given to use. So for people who are using the symbol of marriage, for example, I think they're taking that on through intuitive guidance, and they feel it's very important, but they have to honor that symbol. And because it's part of their own mind training, it's part of their own clearing away whatever distractions and temptations are, and coming to a sense of integrity, which is really in the mind. It's not so much a personal thing, it's integrity in the mind. And then when people take on other symbols, I rejoice with them too, because I sometimes they're more into diet or yoga or exercise than they are into interpersonal relationships. So I'll just join them right there and say, tell me, how's your discipline going? I'd love to hear more about it.
So what I hear you saying is that it's more important to be integrity with the choice of symbols than to bicker over whether this symbol is it or not. Is that the idea?
Yeah. I feel like there is no universal culture. There are no universal symbols. I mean, you know, there's general agreement, you know, thou shalt not kill, and then you meet pygmies or, you know, people that say, no, we don't agree with that. So there is no universal theology. There is no universal culture. We can't just say these are good symbols and these are bad symbols. It's more the integral use of the symbols and the purpose behind the symbols that I always say is where we have to really come to an allegiance, a loyalty there.
Well stated, thank you. So a while back you mentioned millennials. So let's talk about the evolution of technology and, you know, the world that kids age 10, 20, 30 are growing up in is quite different than the world that you and I grew up in. And so talk a little bit, if you would, about technology. Certainly there's a light side to it, but then there's a dark side to it. So how can we reach people who have a hard time communicating without their thumbs?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, you know, I do like that movie, Her. And I remember there's a scene where all these people are moving up and down these steps, and they all have they're just focused on their little smartphones, and the little thumbs are going. Amazingly, they're not running into each other. They must be somewhat intuitive, but I actually feel like, again, the question is always, what is it for? So just like with anything, if we're not really clear with the purpose out front, then anything can be hijacked by the ego. And certainly technology is a good example of that, where people, if they really let the ego hijack the technology, it can get into isolationism, it can get into all kinds of manners of defense and avoidance that is, instead of hiding around a persona mask, it's almost hiding behind, having an avatar or something where people don't even put their picture online anymore out of fear of something, and talk about hiding behind an image, literally having an avatar that speaks for them. And so I think it's really the purpose underneath that's the most important.
One of my clients said she was addicted to social media, and I asked her, what is the value in it? Like, why is that more fun for you than dealing with people directly? She said, because I'm afraid of people. And she said, a face-to-face human interaction is threatening to me. So it's easier for me to have a buffer by a device that keeps me one level away from the people I'm afraid of. I can control that and manage that more than just dealing with that upfront, up close and personal relationship.
Yeah, I really find that I enjoy watching Amazon Prime or Netflix or some of these series and some of these things they're coming out with now around clones or all different kinds of devices that are really just using technology. Back in our days, we'd tune into Star Trek, whatever version or year, but there's a lot of really good shows that are coming out that I'm actually enjoying using to do commentary on, that use a lot of super high technology, and yet it really starts to get to the core of getting into the guidance, into the intuition, and away from the reacting and responding to the images.
So it's really how we use it that determines its value. What's this for?
Yeah.
Here you and I'm in Hawaii, here in Mexico, and we're reaching people all around the globe at this very moment through technology. So, spirit can use any technology that the ego can use, and the spirit can use it in spirit's purpose. That's how I like to hold it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been amazed. I've kind of been doing this for a couple decades now, using movies and music, but particularly the movies and the episodes I'm coming up with. The Spirit is showing me that, people would always ask me, how can I go the most rapid way into a spiritual, profound experience? And it's more and more, I can sit with a group of people, I'm guided to use a specific episode or a specific movie, and the combination of the movie, the pauses, the commentary just uncorks something where people go into a mystical experience. And so again, it's the music and the movies being used in a very precisely guided way seems to be somehow a time saver or something that pops the cork.
And a good director and good acting can bring to light a huge spiritual lesson that you would not get by reading a self-help book. I mean, Jesus taught in parables. He was a master of the story, and you tell lots of stories, and so do I. And it gets to people on a subconscious level that the intellect doesn't quite touch.
Yeah.
So speaking of Jesus, we both love Jesus. So would you talk about your relationship with Jesus as a teacher, as a mentor, as a guide? How has that evolved, and how does it transcend what you were taught when you grew up? A lot of people still struggle with Jesus and Christianity because they have negative history with it, but of course there's much more to it than that. So let's hear about your relationship with Jesus, if I may.
Yeah, it's one of such devotion, respect, and yet there's that sense of equality that's there, that's so pervasive. Even this past year, I met somebody who had been raised Mormon, and they spent a little bit of time with me, and they just were like shaking their head. They said, "I've never met anybody that loved Jesus like you love Jesus, or talks about Jesus the way you talk about Jesus in such natural terms, like he's right there with you all the time." And I feel like it's kind of gone from more of an adoration and a devotion more into a sense of a merge, where now it's like that Paul McCartney and Wings song, "Don't ever ask me why I never say goodbye to my love, it's understood." What to me is understood is the presence is so here and now, so in the moment, that when I want people to, if they read this book, This Moment Is Your Miracle, I want them to go into an experience of the moment. Oh, I got to go higher with it. Well, it has to be an experience where they're just so like, oh my gosh, like a discovery of that presence. And then I did another book a while back, Quantum Forgiveness, Physics, Meet Jesus. People love that title, Physics, Meet Jesus. And again, you can kind of see that face on there, very softly. So it's pretty much for me, it's been like a merge, I have to say, where at the beginning I was raised Christian, and so when I was into the course at the beginning, I had the same experience a lot of people do, which there's a little bit of embarrassment or something in there with talking about Jesus, or even being concerned, how will this be received? And now it just feels like it's been such a merge that the Spirit just speaks through me in any context or any situation where there's love there. And I don't get to choose the words, even the word Jesus. There's sometimes a smile or a hug or a pat on the back is the most that can be extended. And I just love that.
He is my Sadguru as well, and I think of all the great spiritual teachers, my relationship with him has been the most empowering. He's real to me. And, it's not the religious Jesus or the historical Jesus. To me, it's the personal Jesus. It's the one who told Helen Schuckman that he would help her buy a winter coat if she needed it. Do you remember that story?
Yeah,
so,
I forgot.
Let's talk about how Jesus or higher power is willing to actually touch us in the midst of our material life. Sometimes we think we go into spirituality, we have to be a monk, and we know it's food and clothing and money. But do you think that God, higher power, Holy Spirit is willing to really reach into the nitty-gritty of our physical life and help us with things that we're worried and afraid about that are quite material? Is that your experience or otherwise?
Yeah, I find that the Spirit is very practical, and part of that practicality is the Spirit reaches us in great detail and with great specificity. And even in the workbook, the Course, Jesus says, you believe in specifics, so it is specifics that we will work with. He comes right out. I find a lot of spiritualities, all is God, all is one, all is love, and so forth. If we're going to really have an experience in a full way, we have to realize that there has to be an unwinding that occurs, and that unwinding involves specifics. That's why I've always loved guidance. And for me, even when I would read a teacher say, well, you won't actually hear guidance in this lifetime, I would just be like, what? Because to me, it was so practical. I mean, I couldn't even imagine unwinding the ego in a rapid way without guidance. And what I mean by guidance, I mean very specific guidance. Call so-and-so, go here, go there. I feel like, to me, that was the greatest experience. After I really made contact, was I was not only willing to listen to that instruction, that commentary, but also follow it. Really, I saw the benefit of of really following it. The ego at the beginning would object and say, "Are you crazy? Why would you ever do that?" Or it was always trying to counter the guidance. But I quickly learned to really follow that guidance, and that it was for my own good.
Can you think of any examples of where you've been guided very specifically in a surprising way, where something turned out really cool that you never would have known if it hadn't been specific guidance? Anything in recent memory?
Well, it's just there's been so many parts of my life, but I was just talking to a group recently, even before I had the course, I was guided to step out of graduate school. And I was in this real elite program with full scholarship, and there was only 8 of us picked out of many hundreds. And that was a good example for me of I just tried to fight it. I tried to resist it. This can't be right. But actually, I see now, in retrospect, that I had a whole journey of extending and sharing that I wouldn't have been able to dive into and really be of full use if I had just hung on to that graduate program in school psychology and psychometrics and WAIS and intelligence tests, and it was way too tiny for me, but at the time it seemed like that was my whole life, my whole world. So that's an example that's kind of an extreme example.
Did the guidance come and say, just leave that world? Was there another world that it was introducing you to by contrast?
Well, at that point, it was guiding me out of one very kind of pressured elite graduate program into another one that was called Educational Foundations, that was very eclectic and very open. And I find that's how practical the spirit is. It's not always like giant steps of leave graduate school, but it actually guided me to my next step. And then the course came when I was in this Ed Foundations program. I was expanding my mind, and then Jesus said, "Oh, here, I've got a book for you now." And I was like, whoa! So it went beyond much faster.
Who gave you the course? How did you get turned on to the course?
Well, I was at a Humanistic Psychology conference out at La Jolla, California. And Virginia Satir was there, I think, and Francis Vaughn and Roger Walsh, amazing teachers, transpersonal psychologists. And so it was kind of in that, we both love psychology too, and a humanistic psychology. Carl Rogers was there. That was the last conference he spoke at. And to be in the same auditorium with him, and then at the end, people rose. I didn't know that'd be the last time he would speak on planet Earth, but people rose and gave him like a 10-minute standing ovation. And my heart just blew open. I mean, I just had tears pouring down my face, and people were just applauding and cheering and cheering. And when you look at, Carl Rogers even had a young graduate assistant called William Thetford. Some people don't know about. There's all these little connections where Jesus is using all these amazing teachers. And so I gained a huge appreciation for it that way.
It's really odd you should mention that, because when I was in graduate school, I was in guidance and counseling, similar to what you were doing. And my first class, the professor walks in, and he puts a cassette player on the table. He says, "Here's my course." And he pressed the button, and it was Sammy Davis Jr. singing, "I Gotta Be Me." And then he held up the book for the course, which was Carl Rogers on encounter groups. And I took that book home, and I think I read it in one evening. I was so hungry for authenticity and connection and trust and honoring of self. It was the spiritual food that I'd been craving and had no idea that I was craving. And that was the turning point in my life when I stepped off the intellectual path onto the spiritual path. So in an odd way, Carl Rogers was a turning point for both of us. Go figure, I never knew that.
You find all these similarities, yeah. Because it was basically pretty radical. Even most people knew of Freud, and most people knew of B.F. Skinner, and But humanistic psychology was kind of like the new kid on the block, and yet both of us like lit up so much with that was our journey into authenticity. And then later on, when I heard Bill Thetford, was a graduate assistant of Carl Rogers, I just had the biggest smile on my face, like, oh Jesus, you are having so much fun with all these characters.
With synchronicities, which brings us to something else I wanted to talk to you about. So in those days, what we were doing was called the Human Potential Movement.
Yes.
And I recently read a section of the Course called At Home in God, where Jesus says something, I'm paraphrasing, something like, he says, if you are still seeking to reach your potential, you are heading for something that already exists. He's saying, what already is eternal, and there's no use in reaching for something you already have. It's a big paraphrase, but that's the idea. Do you remember that at all? Do you want to comment on that concept, David?
Yeah, I think that was also in my work with the Course where I realized I was so much into self-help. I was so much into human potential. I was so much into expanding awareness. And then I think it was in one instant it started to dawn on me that spirit was created perfect. It's like that idea that spirit is in a state of grace forever. Your reality is only spirit, therefore you are in a state of grace forever. To me, I read these little logical things because I was big into philosophy, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Now that almost is giving us permission, I would say, to start to transcend the self-help, the idea that sometimes Deepak will talk about pure potentiality, and yet reality isn't potentiality. There's an actual state of spirit and a state of grace. And as soon as we acknowledge that, and we just go, I don't know what that is, but oh, does that sound really good? Then already we're opening our prayer of our heart to something that's even better, more transcending than self-help and growth.
Well, the self that's helping is a self that needs help. Not your own guide to miracles because you can make them necessary. So, are we talking now about the end of reaching, the end of striving, the end of trying to make something happen? Are we talking about I need do nothing?
I think we're approaching that because, it says right away at the beginning of the Course that it is not necessary to seek for what is true, but it is necessary to seek for what is false. So that's the step right before the grace, right before the I need do nothing. And I find there have been some really good teachers in Advaita and the Course that really emphasize don't use this spiritual phraseology, don't use a bunch of affirmations to cover over this exposure. So I think the exposure is really important, and we have to allow, that's what seeking for what is false is really about. That's the neti of the East. Expose. And then there comes a point where you start to open up and say, okay, it is a realization that comes to a place of stillness where the very thing that was seeking, the very thing that was searching is not real. And there a calmness, a peace comes in. There's nothing driving anymore. There's nothing pushing. There's not even that inquiry that's so helpful, but there comes a point where the inquiry dissolves away and we're just into beingness.
I love that. You have a wonderful exercise in your new book where you talk about calling forth the fear so you can look at it head on. And, we tend to gloss over fear, distract ourselves. But what I hear you saying is that if you really want to heal fear, you have to just let it come up and boldly shine the light on it so you can heal it. So would you share that process? This is one of my favorite parts of your book. So let's hear about it from your own words, please.
Well, the fear cannot be pushed out of awareness or denied, because then you can't really go into the healing while that fear is still down there. So I've always really been open to all kinds of exercises, most of them call experiential exercises, where you're out of the comfort zone, where the fears just start coming up. Sometimes it could be as simple as an eye-gazing exercise. You mentioned your friend that uses social media to not have even those face-to-face encounters, where the fear will start to rise up. And when it's coming up, we don't have to try to fix it or offer advice. That's why in expression sessions we really have those guidelines of no people pleasing, no private thoughts, because we want that emotion to come up. We want there to be a permission for that. We want there to be an openness to that, an acceptance. And so it's encouraged. And I think another reason why people don't do it is because they fear the volatility of that emotion, the intensity of it, and also underneath that, just the rejection. Like, oh, if I let this up, then I'll surely be rejected. So all those factors are around allowing that to come up. And when I went to China, for example, I go to these countries where there's a strong systematic denial and repression mechanism. It's like they just come together with me in that presence of openness and acceptance, and it just comes up like a geyser or a volcano. And they also feel how valuable this is. Like they intuitively know this is going to be really important for me to heal, to let it up. So I did have, my last time in China, I ended up doing a dance party, and you should have seen those people dancing. They were all over the place. They were so excited to have that opportunity.
Wow. So you're a great healer, man. You're really serving transformation on the planet. I want to remind people that we're celebrating your new book, which is coming out within a few days, called This Moment Is Your Miracle, with a wonderful subtitle, Spiritual Tools to Transcend Fear and Experience the Power of the Present Moment. So, goodness, David, anything else you'd like to share before we close? I need to tell people that, I fell in love with you when I discovered your YouTubes a while back, and I used to, I've been doing the course for many years, and the clarity and simplicity and humility and grace that you exude in your teachings really won me. So I still do sometimes, but for a long time I listened to your YouTubes every night before I went to bed, and I just found them very soothing. It was a lovely way to end the day and kind of go off into a nice space. It was much better than watching a horror movie. Thank you very much. So I really want to honor you for the contribution you've made to me and so many other people. You're just a world-class teacher. So what else? Anything else you want to share before we close? What is Spirit guiding you to tell folks who are listening?
Well, I just so much enjoy this encounter with you. I have to say I have enjoyed your books, but meeting you there, I think it was at the conference in San Francisco, was such a delight. I felt such a deep connection. I feel your humor is so healing and so important in a world where often spiritual writings are quite serious. They don't have that light touch with them, and to me that light touch is so important. And I have to say too, for those who are going to look at the book, that Alan wrote the foreword, and I'm just so honored that you would write a foreword for this book, because I feel you are just very highly respected, and I can just feel your heart. That's with watching those YouTubes and our meeting, I could just feel your heart. I could feel that connection, and to me, that's the most important thing, that heart-to-heart connection. The rest is just words, But it's so beautiful to have someone who has such a beautiful heart, and I'm really honored that we share this journey together as brothers opening to this love.
Thank you, my brother. I sure love you so deeply. Thank you so, so much. Is there anything else going on in your service world besides the book that you'd like people to know about, and new programs, or are you kind of laying low? What would you like people to know about?
Well, this year is quite an amazing year. We have had a movie, a documentary going in the community that was filmed at one of our month-long mystery schools. And it's called Take Me Home, and it's going to be coming out this year. And that is amazing because it doesn't so much focus on the verbiage of the teachings, but it through, just like a well-crafted movie that you can feel with the scenery, with the images, it takes you right in, and you cry and your heart opens. So I'm excited about that. That Take Me Home. My friend Francis Zhu has directed that, and we've had a lot of the community involved in that. This book, This Moment Is Your Miracle, we not only it's coming out on February 2nd here very quickly, but we're going to be sharing about it, and Jenny and Greg, who are in the studio, are going to be traveling around, and I'm going to do a couple appearances. One's up in Oakland, Berkeley. Berkeley's such a great area for expansive thinking up there, and then down in Del Mar, a little bit north of San Diego. So that's exciting. And then also we have a new center this year opening up on the island of Mallorca in the Mediterranean. It's just gorgeous over there, and we're just excited to have a base, a permanent base over there in Europe, where we can just share and shine and have devotionals and continue on the work we're doing. So there's a lot cooking here in 2019.
And people can find you mostly at davidhoffmeister.com, or is there another web address you like?
Yeah, that's pretty much the main portal to find me. And then, yeah, there's lots of other YouTube and Spreaker and many other ways.
Mm-hmm. Phenomenal YouTube subscriptions, like 230,000. I was so impressed. It's like people find you and love you and keep watching you, turn their friends onto you. Hallelujah.
Yeah, but they're having the same experience where I did 2 or 3 years ago, I did a retreat at our monastery, Living Miracles Monastery, and I just asked the people, I said, how did you get here? And like 90% of the people said through YouTube. And I said, amazing, that is, that the technology is really being used by the Holy Spirit.
You know, I think you're so personable and so amiable that your essence comes through in the YouTube. People see your face and they see your smile, they see you're a joyful creature, they see you laughing, they hear your stories. It's such a wonderful venue to connect with you. I mean, if anything proved that we're not limited to our bodies, it's this technology where our spirit is imbued in the technology, and we're connecting with each other's spirits, even if our bodies are on the other side of the planet. So, I mean, what a great teaching that is.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of in that sense, it's a fun time to be alive, where even though our title was living in times where external world events seem to be cuckoo, but actually the flip side is it's with the technology which you just described, it's kind of a wonderful way to experience each other.
It's a big acceleration, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is.
If I may mention briefly, I'm starting my own foray into webinars with A Course in Miracles, and I'll be doing a monthly webinar on the Course in Miracles. So if people want to find me, it's at alancohen.com, if I may, and they can sign up for my monthly webinar.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Would you like to close us out with a prayer or anything that you think would be appropriate to tie this up, Mr. David?
Yes. Spirit, thank you for coming into our hearts. Thank you for shining through us, radiating through us. May we always remember our need for you, beloved Spirit, because for us to let go of our attachments and our worries and concerns, we need to follow you, and we are here for you. We say yes when you call to us. Amen.
Thank you, David Hoffmeister, for being one of the most blessed lights on the planet that I know. And I wish you well in every dimension. And I wish everyone who touches you through your teaching the highest blessings. We are very graced to have you on the planet.
Thank you, Alan. Love you.
Okay.
Love you.
Aloha.
Aloha.